Laura Desmond saw with her agency, which is it's a fairly significant agency in the United States, a plateauing in the display space. I know we personally don't see that at Federated Media, and we're seeing a lot of migration from particularly print, but also somewhat TV. Budgets starting to move over and allocations moving over. And a lot of that is still going to display media. I think there are a couple of things that are happening though that are on top of that, which is as dollars move from one platform to the next, and certainly print and TV still have a very vibrant business. It's not a $1 for $1 move from one ad platform to another. I think a lot of money that's shifting in marketing budgets is actually going to marketers' own websites or to platforms like Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, where they're taking those dollars that are marketing dollars, not advertising dollars, and spreading those around quite a bit. So the idea of an advertiser having their own TV show is really almost unheard of. A marketer doesn't necessarily produce their own TV show. I know they have, but it's very rare. Fewer, or I should say more, actually have produced their own magazine, but still it's a very small number. Every single marketer from corner store to multi-billion dollar multinational have to have at least a web presence. So in a sense, they are all publishers. And what's really interesting is this is my 5th Conversational Marketing Summit, going from the beginning where the talk was really about what is social, should I even engage in social, do I talk back to my customers, and if so, what do I say? What we're seeing is with Laura Desmond and almost every other speaker, an acceptance and an acknowledgement and really an enthusiasm about, well, yes, marketers are publishers, and now the conversation has moved to how, what, when, where, and why. So that shift has been really exciting and kind of gratifying to see. What I think Laura is seeing though is that the display media budget may be plateauing just because it's at a fairly big base, and that it's actually the rich media ads, the non-traditional ads, where a lot of the display growth is going. And we certainly see those larger formats, richer formats, being much more compelling to advertisers across the board. And then I think it becomes a matter of classification. Is that display media, or is display media confined to a handful of formats? And to me, I think that's up for grabs, and I think that's less of an issue than where are the dollars going and how are they being deployed.
It seems like with new innovative ad formats, whether they're related to video or content, that there's a positive, which is, oh, this is actually pretty cool, but the negative for the agency that represents a brand is we now need to create something totally new, different, creative. So can you talk about that kind of that give and take between, oh, it's cool, but it almost like slows us down in terms of allocating dollars and getting our brand name out there?
See that all the time. And Neil Mohan from Google actually spoke to a survey that was done by a consultancy talking about that very issue of the amount of dollars going to administration for a web campaign, just any web campaign, is multiple, 14, 15 times greater than what goes to TV. And I think, well, it's not limited to these new formats and these kinds of things. The fact that you have just a blank canvas to paint on in many respects gives people the freedom to really push. Inevitably what happens is that pushing yields and creates all sorts of additional friction on the back end, and from an execution perspective, from a creative perspective, from a spec perspective. So there is that tension that I think is inherent in any new medium, and I think just because of the absolute, almost limitless options that at least seem available online, that we're not getting out of that growth, that growth curve fast enough for some marketers to really deploy significant dollars. And that's felt at the publisher level. It takes more people at a publisher level to run an ad campaign than it does for other mediums still. Certainly at the agency level, that's about their profitability. That's about their ability to create good business and see these platform decisions made without finances being a part of that. And then certainly at the brand marketing level, they're looking to deploy their dollars to reach as many people as possible. So that is a challenge for the industry. I think we're going to get there. My concern is that we don't get there at the cost of creativity and the art element of the art and science equation that is marketing. And there are times where I see some of that potentially happen.
So the name of this conference is Conversational Marketing. So Can you give me an example of maybe Federated engaging with a brand to hit on kind of the essence of conversational marketing?
Sure. So I won't use any one brand because I love all my clients equally, but I'll give you kind of an example of what that conversation looks like from a campaign or from a program perspective. Typically, when we're talking about a conversation, you're talking about an asynchronous conversation. This isn't IM or any of these kinds of things. Someone says something, someone else responds, these kinds of things. So that happens in three ways. The marketer's putting a message that's aligned with some statement that's coming from a publisher or many publishers. Other sites will respond to that. People who read that content will share it, tweet it, dig it, whatever that sharing mechanism might be. Then the third level of conversation is people are responding to that topic on the site itself. All three types of conversation can yield a really powerful type of engagement that, when it's properly aligned with the program that you're and the interests of the brand, can create a really deep affinity between the person who cares about this topic, the customer, and the brand who's also authentically illustrated that they also care about that. So creating programs where people come together to talk about a shared value, a shared interest, and then facilitating those three types of conversation is really at the core of almost every program we do. What I really love about Outbrain and other companies like Outbrain is they're really focusing on getting the content seen more widely. There is this notion, and will.i.am talked about it at the conference a little bit, that things just go viral. That you just you put it out there, and if it's good enough, it just gets consumed forever. So companies like Outbrain give you more reach for those eyeballs to encounter that content that then can stimulate further sharing and these kinds of things. The other thing it does, though, is it actually can extend the life of that content. The more authentic the community, the more the community people are going directly there to see what the conversation is happening that day, the faster the decay on the lifespan of that content. So lots and lots of people reading that content, viewing that content, if it's video, whatever it might be, right when it's produced for the next week or so. And we see on a lot of our sites, there's a very fast decay in the amount of content. It's still really high quality content and still gets viewed through search and other means, and it's not saying that there isn't additional views, but most of the views are happening that first week. So content syndication tools like an Outbrain or others can provide further viewing length, sustain that curve further, which I think is really exciting. The other thing is it's a really powerful feedback loop to then focus on those pieces of content that really resonate at a really high level. So one of the things I love about my company is at some level, all 180 of our employees are kind of data geeks. They don't all necessarily look and act like the traditional data geek, but they're all there. Actually, we just did some studies around the lifespan of content and the amount of social sharing that's going on across these different platforms. And we saw in most of the communities that we represent that within the first 48 hours, almost all of the social sharing was occurring against those programs. But what was really interesting to me was that different categories that we work in, so in the business space and the kind of the tech news space, Twitter was exceptionally popular. Whereas in the men's lifestyle space, sites like Coolest, The Art of Manliness, The All, these kinds of things, it was much more of a Facebook audience, and the sharing that was being done there. In many of our kind of women's lifestyle spaces, so parenting, home and design, these kinds of things, there was much more engagement via comments than there was necessarily sharing externally and the retweeting and these kinds of things. So what seems like something that's just very consistent across the whole landscape is actually really different between topic areas. Now, certainly some sites have just done a better job implementing one thing or really focus on one thing over another. But there's something larger going on here by categories that really is showing how different types of audiences consuming different types of content will share in very different ways.
How would you use that information when you're now going back to a brand you're working with? So if you said the men's space,
Yep.
What was it, Twitter or
Facebook?
Facebook's
is
more
much more active on Facebook.
So what would you be saying to a brand that wants to get in front of men?
Well, a couple of things. So there's two ways to look at that. The first way is if someone comes to us and says, we really want to engage an audience, we want to integrate this marketing program with our Facebook fan page or like pages, and that's an important metric of success for us, is how do we activate and grow that Facebook community. Well, if the audience makes sense, and that's a big if, not every brand makes sense on those sites, selecting that category, the men's lifestyle category, over maybe something that might seem more obvious for a tech news site or that kind of thing, that might be the right tactic to play. So there's that angle, like what are the KPIs you're looking to achieve. The other part of that, though, is also so many of the programs we're doing will deliver the results, and because we're still innovating and trying new things, we get questions like, well, was this good? So part of this is we're going to be using this data to say, well, this is how this benchmarks against the category as a whole, and compare and contrast how their work did with the average work. So I think those are the two primary uses. I'm sure there are more, but as I said, it's data we fielded like a week and a half ago, so I'm still kind of getting my brain around it as well.